Hi, and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. Sorry about the delay there. My meet froze up, so we just had to rejoin, and we are good to go. I will hand it over to you for the introductions. Thanks for being here with us this Sunday.
Okay, great. Yeah, good to be back. So, share some links quickly. So, we'll talk about this. I wasn't going to watch it, but Jennifer mentioned this T-jump debate with Daniel Haiquitquitju on atheism. And yeah, it looked like T-jump didn't fare too well. Like, this guy was pretty educated. Went to Harvard and has degrees in philosophy. And T Jump was doing his, kind of like general um, technique, dancing around the points. So, this question of are atheists consistent skeptics? And so maybe I'll save this for a
Yeah, we
minute.
can talk about it a bit later. Like, I just thought it's kind of weird because there seems to be these like contradictory notions about, on the one hand, it's like, well, all atheism is a lack of a belief. And on the other hand, well, actually, atheism entails all these other, moral stances. I'm not really sure. It sort of was unclear what Tom's position was, and I think it may have something to do with his like somewhat unusual stance on morals as being non-normative. That's just a thought, though. But please continue.
Yeah, it was pretty unclear, like whether T Jump requested the debate. I guess Daniel Haiquikaju is a bigger streamer, has over 150,000 subs, had over 1,000 live viewers, and I guess debate is also what he does from an Islamic perspective. But just this question: if atheists reject religion because of skepticism, do they consistently apply their skepticism? And from his perspective as a Muslim, to say that atheists could tend to be anti-Islam, and then the polling, the statistics that atheists tend to have near consensus in the 90% on issues like homosexuality, abortion, um, feminism. That is it the science that's causing that? And T Jump didn't. I mean, he just seemed like his general talking point. So it was a pretty low quality debate. And then the T Jump kept interrupting. James was even like, T Jump, you got to stop interrupting. And T Jump like threatened to leave. And he's like, if he lies, I'm going to interrupt. And so it was kind of weird. God forbid.
I was
Jennifer,
surprised at how long it went on for, frankly.
yeah, I guess they're making the money. So they had that thing with
With the super chats, right? I saw, I think, in a comment that um the other guy, not T Jump, was streaming to like an audience of 1,000 people. So
yeah, although he might not get as many super chats, or he probably has like a narrow casted, mostly Islamic audience. But yeah, they're making money off of, like, I saw Brittany from Politically Provoked has been on and debating, I guess, God forbid, against transsexualism or something like that. And like James was just like muting people. He's doing these new bigger panels, just like muting people. And it's like, just so that he could make some money. And they're kind of low quality. I mean, I always thought the channel was kind of low quality in general, at least the intellectual end. But now, like these big panels, um, the intellectual level is decreasing. And it's funny to see James there, like just like muting people. And it's like, who would even sign up for that? Like, God forbid. But it's a pretty big channel, so people are. But I wasn't even going to watch it. But Jennifer mentioned that T Jump was getting beat pretty bad, so I tuned in, and it's like, yeah, he did get beat pretty bad. Because the Muslim guy, had done his research and his homework and had pretty sound arguments. And so T Jump just resorted to his talking points that and then he was like, "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand philosophy." And the guy's like, "I went to Harvard. I have a master's degree in philosophy." And then T Jump is like, "Oh, I forgot. I'm in a non-troll." Like Claire said, that T Jump has a background in like finance or marketing or something like that, or maybe not even a college degree. So that his you don't even know what you're talking about um, didn't seem to work that well. And then maybe God forbid if it's the blue eye, the blue eye, um, you being falsely
Reified, the
well falsely
reification of the
correlated with
blue-eyed man.
competence. We're just like, okay, the Muslim went to Harvard and he's got extremely well researched, and T Jump really has no educational background. Is kind of like a pyramidal marketing scheme.
Well, not quite. He put out another video on his channel, which I thought was good, like about his emotions and stuff and wanting to have an atheist church and stuff. I thought that was interesting. And he said that philosophy was, he was lonely, but he wanted social interaction, and philosophy was the least annoying thing he could think of to interact with people socially over.
Well, I mean, his competence level is quite low. So it's just like the blue eyes being confused with competence.
Ouch.
Random at the Royal Institute, physics experiments that changed the world. Wasn't that great, but last week was the fast day, and so this was in Jerusalem at the Western Wall. Some singing afterwards. Quality wasn't all that good. A video in Detroit tearing down a highway construction project, investing in Detroit on CNBC. Tough to know. Like, I used to be more active in Detroit, and now I'm not active at all. So it's tough to know economically or what's going on in Detroit. CNBC also a video on why power outages are getting worse, and we've talked about this. And like, God forbid, it's been affecting me. Power outages last
Haven't
week.
brownouts in California been a thing for a while? My aunt and uncle live down there, and they say that kind of heard of it over the years as being a thing.
Well, I mean, there's always been power outages, but it's been getting worse in the last
I'm
few
talking
years.
about rolling outages based on the grid itself not being able to meet the demand.
I'm not sure I haven't heard about that in like California, but I mean, here basically they say it's a combination of old infrastructure, um, increased use, and environmental, global warming. So, old, outdated grid that has issues, plus wasn't designed for the current demands, and higher wind speeds and rainfall and extreme weather, God forbid. This channel is kind of interesting. I've shared in the past Geometry, dealing a lot with like semiconductors, and this was on running neural networks on meshes of light. Which I don't know. I watched it. Not sure I quite understood if it's like fiber optics, or if you're thinking like quantum computation. It's not quite like quantum computation, but as opposed to electrical signals that you could run the network on light signals, and so I guess there's such a thing. And they have quite a few interesting videos on that channel. Here's more Detroit about the state of real estate and rental markets in Detroit. Kind of like interesting statistics that there's a lot of landlords, and then there's a certain amount of landlords that have a lot of properties. So there's a lot of people that own one property and rent it out, and then there's a small amount of people that own a whole bunch of properties. And so just the current state, Detroit has hardly built any houses in the last like 30 years because of the population decline. So just random economic stuff, like civil engineering. Here on the chess server, I played in the Lee Chess Marathon. You can see Doooovid has placed top 500 in 4 of them now. I've played in 4 out of the last 5 of them. Got top 500, like top 2%, gives me the special trophy. And here was some statistical analysis of the type rating and score that you need to place in the top 500, 100, and various things. But people who follow chess, a nice statistical analysis. Here's another interesting. When you program the chessboard, how do you code for the chessboard? So there's multiple ways to do it. It's an 8x8 grid, so you can have it 0x0 to 7x7. You could have squares 0 to 63. You could go 1 to 64 or 1 to 8. Usually do 0, or you could have a plus negative, and there's multiple different ways to code the chessboard, and there's different advantages and disadvantages to doing it. But you're just thinking of representation of something that you would think is relatively simple, like a chessboard 8x8 grid, that there's multiple ways to code it. Jennifer shared this random about social networks and depression, and God forbid, the more friends you have
It
on the
was
network.
because it had the term self in it, and I figured it was a long shot, but I thought you might be interested, and I thought it was kind of a neat correlation.
Yeah, but there's thousands of papers every year that self is very common. I mean, psychology, like self-concept, self-esteem, most of it. The other paper Jennifer shared relating to depression. Oh, that was the other one. Sorry, that 2 papers she shared. This was the self and a framework for understanding depression. The other one was pain tolerance predicts human social network size. So this one was just showing the more friends you have on social network, the more pain tolerance you could have. And it could be like an openness type thing. The more open you are to other people in different ways, the more dissonance, the more higher pain tolerance you have.
Or the more blasted your pleasure circuits are, and pain and pleasure are covariate. Like a bigger social network means the dopamine means a bigger basically comes down to dopamine thing. If you have a bigger pleasure tolerance, you also have a bigger pain tolerance. That would be my first guess.
Yeah, so this one on depression, the self, was actually kind of interesting. It's a little bit more that I'm going to go in through to the essay I'm writing. Even mentions the narrative self versus the experimental self, and neural correlates. So I'm not going to get through the neural correlates in this essay. It's too much, but interesting topic to be returned to. David Rubenstein interviewed Ann Wojcicki, Susan's sister, about 23andMe. And I guess 23andMe's, the stock's not doing that well. It went public. It's not doing particularly well. But it was a semi-interesting interview. Nothing that interesting. Just thought I'd share it. God forbid, this person clipped a video of mine from like 5 years ago. I know there's the other guy who was watching our stuff and tried doing this like mob talk. This is probably more like mob entertainment group, God forbid. And I actually saw they interview this guy who I went to high school with. I guess he's buddies with him, Scott Bernstein from the Purple Gang in Detroit, the Jewish gang in Detroit. But they clipped me with Eric Stryker and then Bruno the Doberman talking. So I'm not even sure if they were talking about Bruno the Doberman and they just clipped me. God forbid Angel Gotti. Have you heard of John Gotti? God forbid.
I don't think so.
He was like last generation, one of the biggest mobsters in America. Um, and I think he eventually went to prison, maybe passed away. And his wife, like a decade ago, like her side was cleared for like any criminal and had a reality TV show, Growing Up Gotti. And so these are like,
Maybe I've
uh,
seen that before in a hotel or something.
the daughter of John Gotti, God forbid, and like her grandkids. So it was a reality TV show of this woman,
Yeah.
daughter, and grandkids. And so she, I guess, is a popular podcaster that talks about the mafia. So there's a genre of mafia talk. If it's like true crime, um, organized crime these days, like it's tough to know. I told Luke kind of like becoming an Orthodox Jew is kind of like joining the mafia because there's a lot of connections between Orthodox Jews and the mafia, and the mafia is to some extent an arm of the Catholic Church. Like almost all mafia is Catholic, and the interplay with Orthodox Jews in the neighborhoods. Like I lived in Brooklyn, right next to the Italian neighborhood, and even like organized crime. But like God forbid, we could talk about that more. But for some reason, someone clipped me from like 5 years ago, and not even sure. Well, I was schmoozing with him in the chat about Israeli politics. So God forbid. Daniel, Active Inference is back doing a few streams. Daniel on his own channel did a stream about. It was kind of interesting. Some of the stuff we talked about a few
I
years ago.
know. He's really good at it, eh?
Yeah, he's a pretty good podcaster. Like Science Talk isn't that popular, so like it only has 25 views, and he's talking about his ants and kin selection to multi-level selection, and he's not really getting into racial science, but some of this would probably be most usefully used for uh, racial science.
I
Some of
gotta
these,
tell you, I don't see it happening, and here's why. The DNA tests are presuming their own conclusions. That's just not something you can really. At this point, doesn't appear to be something you can control for. So
yeah, it's unclear, but this one was actually pretty interesting, and so good to him to put in a lot of work into it. Um, you know, it's it's tough to I interviewed him on my channel, so he's only got 76 subs, so it's tough to build up a network. Even Active Inference, they're almost hitting 1,000. Back to it, but science, straight science talk is hard to build up. God forbid. I saw that Luke shared this. I guess it wasn't all that popular. Someone just made a random documentary on millennial woes. And it's interesting, according to this, millennial woes got started streaming by Davis Arini. I guess Jennifer knew. He came on my stream on COVID-19 that Jennifer set up. So I'm not sure how exactly Davis Arini, if he's Canadian or you had bumped into him streaming. But the
he's been
channel mentioned,
around the manosphere for a very long time. He
yeah. So
goes back to almost as long as Maddox. So it's like that's like asking me, how do I know who Maddox is? It's like the internet.
I don't even know. Well, no, I'm saying that you messaged him. He came on my channel for one of the COVID-19 programs, and you're the one who. So it wasn't just like you heard of him. You had his contact, or like you had some sort of direct contact with him. I didn't
Might
even
have actually,
really
you
heard.
know what? Now that I think about it, it might have been Claire Cobb, but I frankly don't remember. But he goes back far before I knew him with Claire Cobb, so that's all I know.
Yes, I guess he's been in it forever. Millennial woes, kind of first started streaming from watching him. He never became super big. Like he was on Luke Ford a few times. Um, he was even going to team up with Halsey when Halsey was starting his own like independent thing. He was on Halsey. Um, so just random. I saw that like the Babs had a cameo of I guess when Millennial Lows first started streaming that the whatever these NRX or groups or whatever that Babs was on it. So it was a random cameo. This is so on the active inference they have I guess called like CAD. I'm not really sure if it's some sort of programming to program active inference. They didn't even sound that clear what they're doing, but some sort of working group that they're trying with active inference. And they mentioned Friston's statistical parameter mapping. And so maybe we'll see more about this in the future. If it's this one might actually be some sort of software for brain mapping, like the CAD that they're working on. Active inference is unclear.
Yeah, I talked to them a little bit about it and tried to see what range of variability existed in the implementation of the method. And as usual, it's just the math is just nobody understands the math well enough to be able to actually either understand what I'm saying or implement what I want. So it's kind of like, yeah, I don't really want to have a bullfight with somebody over what comprises math. I'm sort of done with that. It's like either people are going to accept the facts about math and physics or they're going to not work with me. So that's all I have to say on that at this point.
So I guess this was news this week. Olivia Newton-John passed away this week. I didn't prepare a song for this week. I don't even know any of her major songs. God forbid. The only one here I recognize is "Physical," like "Let's Get Physical, Physical." That's the only one I can even think of
Well,
remembering.
isn't she just basically like known as the star of Greece?
Yeah, I think so. So they say her life kind of followed Greece. That when she was already 30 years old when she was in Greece, like I guess playing a high schooler, uh, but then kind of switched to like the bad girl. And I guess from this perspective, the most interesting thing is that her grandfather is Max Born, the German physicist. So that from the science end, that the most interesting thing about her is that she was the granddaughter of Max Born, one of the main developers of quantum physics. So God bless, passed away at 73 this week, and so I thought I'd mention that. Um, Another random Carl Friston, kind of like another introduction to Carl Friston. Roger Waters, he was in Detroit. I think I mentioned that. Maybe I didn't. I mentioned Billy Joel and Def Leppard, but he toured and played Detroit uh, last month, and he did an interview about politics, and he's a very political figure, um, critic of Israel, but all sorts of stuff. He was calling Joe Biden a war criminal, and so he's interviewed on MSNBC. He opens up his concert where if you don't like my politics, like go to the bar because his show's going to be
And this
about his.
is pretty recent, like uh the 4th of August. Is that right?
He's on tour now. So I mean, he's in his 70s, but he's on tour now. He just, tens of thousands of people came to see him in Detroit, and he's still very politically active. So this interview on Scaramucci, like I guess that's CNN now, was just this last week. So they just released the video last week. They played clips of it, and so this is the full 28-minute video where a lot of people are like, okay, I love your music, but I hate your politics. And so Roger Waters, like in your face, is like, you will hear my politics, like if you come to one of my concerts. So a semi interesting interview. So I mean, he's, I think, the same age as Olivia Newton John, but he seems still in pretty good health. He's still touring, playing huge venues. Here was a video I've shared this quite. This was a new channel. I don't think I shared before. Top Luxury, and it was talking about the decline of the skyscraper, where there was a period where the Burj Khalifa already like 15, 20 years old, uh looked like they were just going to keep on building bigger and bigger skyscrapers, and it turns out that there's been a decline in the skyscraper, that for whatever reasons, the economic or building reasons, that there seems to have been a decline in skyscrapers. This channel also had another interesting video, like what if everyone lived in a single building, which would obviously be impossible, but from construction, so it was semi interesting. Here's some random Pew surveys, because I didn't have that much this week. TikTok, you could see TikTok has overtaken Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. Facebook, from being 71% of teens' use, is down to 30%. Twitter's only 23%. It's the older crowd. YouTube, teens, like 95% of teens use YouTube like daily. So YouTube is the preferred source of just video information. It's very quick, very easy to use, and you can see the decline of Facebook, for almost constantly on YouTube. Here, Andrew Yang has started a third party, so you can see growing consensus that the two-party system is broken. I've been saying that for a long time. So here you have a whole Pew survey on American decline in the political system. Oh, yeah, God forbid, uh, they found a woolly mammoth right here in Michigan, Metro Detroit. They were doing construction on the roads and came across some bones, and turned out to be a 12,000-year-old woolly mammoth, like one of these big elephants. And so the archaeologists from University of Michigan came in, and community members to the excavation. Not a woolly mammoth, a mastodon. Sorry, mastodon. Are you familiar with what a mastodon is?
Yeah, I've heard of that. Dinosaur. Large terrestrial dinosaur. For some reason, I think of a, it's also a band, a metal band.
Yeah, there's that also that came up first. So no,
It was
mastodon.
one of the transformers of the Power Rangers, I think. That was the first
one. A mastodon is not a dinosaur. A mastodon were alive over 10,000 years ago, and so I mean dinosaurs go back like a million years and went extinct.
Yeah, I got confused because of Power Rangers. I remember now. Mastodon is the elephant-looking one. Okay, it's all coming back to me now.
Yeah, they, I guess, went extinct, but their bones are relatively all over North America. So there are quite a few bones and remnants, museums. I think maybe Canada also. So as they were digging for the highway to make a new road, they came across mastodon bones. So here's Pew on what it's like to be Asian in America. And of course, I did my stream on self and identity. Jennifer joined. I read all 11 of my essays. I went over my notes. It was 5 hours. Jennifer joined at the end, and we talked about the notes and the writing process. So that was Thursday night. I finally got together, and so that's it. That's Doovid's week in review. So I'm feeling kind of low energy. I didn't even have a chant this week, so sorry, just feeling a little low energy. But so we had that's the
Did
week.
something
So
happen, or is it the weather?
no, I think I just low energy this week. I'm like maybe maybe depression. I'm not sure of any special depression. Yeah, I think it just it's tough to keep working, keep streaming, keep putting forward the research. Like yeah, I get some feedback, but the feedback's pretty minimal. Basically, Jennifer is my only positive feedback. I'm not sure what happened to Luke. I was supposed to be streaming with Luke this week, and uh, and then he didn't stream at all this week. Like we had that book, and I read. Um, I'd stream with Charles Moskowitz again this Thursday. He's uh, he's getting more active now, moving into primaries, the elections. Like in America, elections are 3 weeks away, 3 months away. Sorry, the primary season's going to finish up in the next few weeks, and so politics has usually in America like there's a huge wax and wane of politics and it's around elections. So the people who are always interested in politics is relatively mild, like 5-10% of the population. People follow very minimally, and especially like candidates, Republican, Democrat stuff. People might follow like the president, foreign affairs, major issues, but the vast majority of Americans don't follow politics. But as elections come closer, uh, you'll have a bigger share during presidential years. Probably less than half of Americans like even follow politics for presidential elections. But like when it comes to presidential elections, it's much in the mainstream. A lot of people, 30% of Americans follow little. They'll start watching news stories. Um, in an even year where they don't have presidential election, just uh, congressional and House, there'll be an uptick. Maybe 20-25% of Americans will follow a little bit. I was also randomly Tulsi Gabbard subbed for Tucker Carlson. I guess he took a night off, and his replacement host was Tulsi Gabbard, which isn't surprising. They became pretty friendly, but so it's an interesting alignment. Doovid Jennifer used to have that in the intro. Doovid, where I met Tulsi Gabbard when she came for the Democratic presidential uh, debates here in Metro Detroit. So it was her on Tucker. I didn't I didn't watch it. Um, that kind of like Charles Moskowitz style, where it's not that intellectual in the analysis. It's talking points, kind of like T Jump. I was saying, where T Jump isn't really communicating intellectual stuff. It's more just talking points. So I mean, T Jump's and I don't compare him to Tucker, but in that sense, like it's more repetitive talking points and trying to win people over, infotainment style than Doovid's a little more on the intellectual, educational content side than that.
Yeah, and even if you want to bring that kind of content to YouTube, you have to be infotainment ish. So I think that's where we kind of struggle.
Well, no, I mean, it's my writing, like, like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? It was like, oh, like, why don't you start doing like a mobcast or something like that? Like, no, I mean, I do what I do. Um, Countless people use YouTube and just don't garner a big audience. So if you want to grow an audience, there's things you could do to grow an audience. Being more entertaining or various things, but just like Daniel, active inference, most science programming never garner a big audience. Uh, and Noam Chomsky, still in his 90s, you get a reasonable. I mean, he's one of the bigger names, and you're saying switch to politics, but you're like, no, I mean, most of the big names, like Stuart Hameroff, like never ever got a big audience. He's been doing it for decades. So it could be in that venue that just never going to garner a big audience like that. And the likelihood that I'm going to adapt myself in a way that's going to make myself more popular is pretty unlikely. But to expand the network, that I would like to do. Have more people to talk to.
To have a bigger network of people who don't watch the show.
Well, I don't need people to watch the show. Like you're saying, like if the
I mean,
show's
that would make it
interesting,
good. Sort of the point of having a show is to talk to people. Showcasing your own work, sure, but it's also sort of good to talk to people. I see it
yeah. I
that
mean,
way
we,
anyway.
we went over that. I mean, God forbid it was kind of like you who were too unfriendly. But the week in review
You
would have
know,
been.
I think sometimes you're pretty crabby towards me. I think a lot of people don't like that. I think I am yeah, I haven't been always super warm towards people. That's true. That's because I have to advocate for myself at all times, and just sort of a bad habit, I guess.
Well, I mean, so week in review never became popular. Like first when it was like connected to a Luke Ford overfill room, maybe we had people on like that, but it never. But we were never able to pick up to have regular guests in like a week in review where people were sharing their research or coming on and
Yeah, because
that
most
sense.
people who are doing research just don't have time to come onto a show and pontificate, especially when there's a chance they're gonna get a zinger from one of the two hosts.
Yeah, no, I mean most people, a lot of people wouldn't mind coming on a show, sharing their research, trying to expand their network. So, to make week in review a
There's no value
meaningful.
proposition to the average researcher for that. There's a negative value proposition for coming on our show, either from you or me. Nope, nothing personal, just that's how it sort of shakes out.
Yeah, so even if it's like active inference where it's just continual one-on-one interviews and not if active inference could do like a week in review where people would just pop on and give updates, um, that's unlikely too. So it's there's not really I don't really see such a thing. I don't think anyone has something like that. And the nature of people self-promoting or
It's
you
a
want
bit
to
of a
get.
crab in the bucket thing. There's a real hard limit, practically speaking, on how much meaningful cooperation or collaboration can happen. And that's sort of where big strides are made. It sort of ends up getting subsumed into a crab bucket effect of sorts, which I suppose leads to a type of siloing, which is a bit alienating and so forth. So, yeah, what can you do? That's modernity for you. Did you want to talk about anything in particular about your week, or did you want me to go into my week? I have been trying to systematize my presentation a little bit more, and also, like you said, the narrative voice thing. That's been on my mind, and it sounds just ridiculous to farm that out, right? To ghostwrite that.
Yeah, but you
That's your
can't. You
conclusion.
could just give over your ideas to somebody else.
I'm basically expecting somebody to sit there and me say something and them say, "Nah, that sounds weird. Why don't I put it this way?" And me say, "Oh, okay." Something like that. But yeah, that's probably far afield of where we are right now.
I mentioned the essay, like the hero's journey, that you're saying that
Well, why do I
either
gotta pay myself as a hero's journey? It just sounds too cheesy.
because it's a universal process
I just don't relate to that story very much.
that the person who gets taken out of society, given some special wisdom, and then comes back to society with something unique to become the hero. Like the monomyth that all journeys follow. And
I don't buy into a monomyth that way. Okay. Like I don't consider you know,
that
Shiva
that
and
is it.
Kali, I don't consider that a hero's journey. Because I don't consider Shinmasta to be a hero's journey. That just doesn't describe it.
Well, I think it's the process that someone acquires the wisdom.
Like if I don't believe in the idea of that monomyth about the hero's journey, and then I present myself in a hero's journey narrative, that may come across as hypocritical.
Well, if you put it just in the simple frame, the person that worked hard to acquire the knowledge that is giving over the knowledge. That I mean, it's the hero's journey. If you don't like the terminology, it doesn't sit well with you
That's the thing. I didn't work
due to your
hard to get
identity
the knowledge.
crisis.
I didn't work hard to get the knowledge. So that's not an accurate reflection of how I feel and what it's not accurate portrayal of what happened. Wasn't, that's not what happened. So I don't I don't know how else to say it. It just seems like it wouldn't fit to try to crush the facts of my life into that narrative. It sort of means I have like some, I don't want to say some chip on my shoulder. I'm not saying I don't have imperfections. I just don't feel that I'm managing my imperfections in a manner that accords with that narrative.
Which is your identity crisis, that's saying that you develop your narrative voice by you recognize by the hero's journey, the person who worked hard to achieve the knowledge and now is giving the knowledge over to the wider public. And so through that you have your narrative voice. And
I
so
didn't work hard to like get the knowledge. I worked hard to put it in a form that people could understand it in.
well, however you're going to phrase it, saying that the person that did the work and now is sharing their work with the public. So I mean, in essence, it's the hero's journey. There's the person, and then they decided to do this work, and now they have the result of the work, and they're sharing it with the public at large, and that's your hero's journey, and that's what gives you a narrative voice.
I just don't feel like a hero. I feel like a loser and a failure. So then to portray myself as a hero is just like, well,
Well, so
that's
you have identity
dishonest.
crisis. So I mean, that's why you have no narrative
Hence why
voice.
I didn't want to talk about myself in the writings. I don't feel it's accurate to say I have an identity crisis. Like, who are we comparing that to here? I'm just saying I don't want to talk about
It's
that.
the technical term. I mean, the psychological technical term for what you're going through is an identity crisis, according to Erickson.
So you're saying because I don't want to put the, because I don't want to put the facts of my life in the sense of a hero's journey, therefore I'm having an identity crisis. It's like one doesn't entail the other, first of all. Are you denying that I have a point that there's other narrative arcs than just a hero's journey, or are you basically sticking to that's the only one?
Well, there's many, but it's like any narrative arc could be put into the hero's journey form.
Okay, so
Just
you're saying that it's basically a meta, almost
it's
meta
just a
story.
three-stage process where you start at A.
So you're saying like it's a basis vector of a story. You can take a story and break it down in that basis, and it'll be coherent no matter what the story is. Is that kind of it?
Yeah, it's the monomyth, and
It's the monomyth.
it's
So you're
if
saying
it's the
there's only one monomyth, and this is it. That's what you're saying.
no, it's basically the simplest form. So like regarding your identity crisis, one thing all people go through identity crisis. That's the Erickson step of identity formation of crisis and resolution. So just because you don't have a resolved identity now. You're still in the crisis phase. But according to Erickson, there's multiple stages, 8 stages, and each one is through a crisis and resolution. So, to say that you're still, your adult identity hasn't been resolved, you're still in identity crisis. That you haven't resolved the coherent adult identity, so you're still in. And so it's not like identity crisis, like a psychological disorder. Identity crisis, according to Erickson, is just this universal process that all people go through, and you're in the crisis until you have a resolution. And because you haven't resolved your adult identity, coherent adult identity, you're still in the crisis phase. And then to put the hero's journey, um, maybe you could do like a 2-part process or or 1-part process, but the simplest 3-part process is about as simple as you could have it, where you have a person in their stable environmental condition, they're removed from their environmental condition in order to acquire some sort of new wisdom or skill, and then they're returned to the environment, their original environment, uh, capable of changing it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really it's simplified, like 3-part process that could apply. I mean, you call it the hero's journey, by saying you're writing, that you means you have something to give over. So there's a process. There was you before you had something to give over. Then there's the something you did in order to have something to give over. And then there's here, now that you've done what you had to do to have something to give over, you're here to give it over. So I mean, if like the Erickson 8-part process, you would call the hero's journey a simple 3-part process to
I don't
identify.
feel like I'm here to give it over. I feel like I should restore the honor of scholars and celibates and mendicants and beg everybody else to value our contributions to society.
But that's the point, that you've withdrawn yourself from society, you've acquired something, and now you're back with something. So I mean, just the simplest form of the hero's journey, and something like, well, you have something you acquired, and now you're back, and you're trying to share it, or however you want to phrase it. That just the fact that you're trying to
I
write,
want to share it in order to defend the honor of the tradition,
the
not
why doesn't
to
matter.
just randomly. Well, the why informs the
I mean, it
how, so
matters
I
to
think it
you.
does matter quite a bit. I have to qualify that. Otherwise, what I'm doing is going to be hard to follow.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter to other people necessarily. It's like you're back and you have something to share, and like, yeah, there's a why to you that matters why you're doing it, but to other people, the why you're doing it matters less. And that why is established through your narrative arc,
Well, the
where
why I'm doing it matters because if other people want to learn to think the way I do, they have to know why I do what I do.
no, they don't. So that you acquired some knowledge,
Yes, motivations are important.
they're important, but they're not necessary. That
Well, they are in my system, I'm afraid.
you acquired some sort of knowledge, and now you're here to share the knowledge, and your motivation for the matter is relevant, but not necessary. And saying if it is part of the
I would
hero.
think motivation would go to credibility of building this hero arc character you're insisting on, when there need to be some sort of coherent thread of motivation throughout my supposed ascent from my low non-self-esteem alleged position to my finally gaining competence up the mountain position.
No, no, I mean, I don't know what you don't understand. Um, there's the narrative voice that will include your motivation, but there's the establishment of competence of knowledge where your motivation is irrelevant. For whatever reason, you acquired the skill, and now you have the skill, and now you're sharing it. So why you did it, why you acquired the skill,
Do you understand that
why
I,
you,
I don't see myself as a sharing a skill so much as defending a principle and that
It
there may
doesn't
be
matter how
certain
you see
things
it.
that get shared in the.
I
So
mean,
what
saying it
skills
matters
am
to
I
you. It
sharing?
matters to you how you see it, and that's what you have to express through your narrative voice. But it's just like, okay, like, you know, Doovid will be here as your chess coach. Well, who is this Doovid guy? That why did you work so hard to become good at chess, and now why are you coaching me? And to say, let's not worry about that. You establish that I'm good enough to be your coach, and I'm your coach, and maybe one day we'll talk about my why I studied chess or why I became a coach. But I mean, in any form, my plumber, uh, my my local contractor, he has his own hero's arc of why he became a plumber. And but like at the point is, I don't care why he became a plumber. I want him to fix my plumbing. And so as long as it's established that he's a competent plumber, I don't need to hear his hero's journey of why he became a plumber. I just need him to know that he's competent and then fix my plumbing. And the same thing for really any form of teaching. There's a higher connection level where like, yeah, your hero's journey is important, but like, no, I want to learn physics and circumstance made it that you're my physics
Yeah,
teacher.
and learning physics involves your motives being matched up with your ideas to some extent. Because,
No, it doesn't.
yeah, well, it says you, but I'm the one with the established credibility in teaching physics. And I say it is.
Well,
So
no,
that's how it is.
I have just as much credibility in teaching physics as you. Like I've
Well, if
taught
this is
physics.
all about a credible narrative arc, isn't the pretext that I'm competent in physics and we're
So
taking
listen,
my
when I
word
was in the
for it based
University of
on the whole.
Michigan, when I was in the University of Michigan Mat Lab and volunteering to tutor, and there's a line of people waiting to be tutored, and when it comes their turn, and if there's a handful of tutors, maybe they don't have an option, maybe they have a few options, and they sit down, and it's me, and usually they don't ask me my story, how I got to be doing this. They just go straight to asking me their math and physics questions. And most of the time, it's sufficient.
Sure.
Maybe we speak, but it's sufficient. They asked me their questions, I answered it, and my own personal journey was completely irrelevant. Just like most of my teachers, uh, most of the people I
Okay.
work with, their
Okay.
journey was completely irrelevant. I took the class, I never asked them their journey. They just started teaching, and I learned. And just
Okay.
like I mentioned, that plumber, the professional setting. There's a deeper level where it's relevant, but on the most base level of service provided, it's not relevant. So I mean, you could do these, God forbid, like you always do with your dance, infinite dance around these definitions. They're saying the base level, the journey's not relevant. Uh, the task at hand is what's relevant, and in many cases, or
Okay,
even
I'll explain why I'm confused. Okay, I'll explain why I'm confused because you said I had to get my narrative voice, and then you proceeded to give me this whole aesthetic that I can't relate to, and I was trying to explain why I can't relate to it. I'm not like married to this idea of whatever it is that you think that I want to do here because I certainly don't.
yeah, there's two different things. So in order to write, you need a narrative voice. In order to perform a service, you don't need a narrative voice.
I've been writing on my blog, so
And you have somewhat of a narrative voice on your blog.
everybody says the same thing. It reads like a list. It's not structured. It's a list. I mean, what am I reading?
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
telling
whatever.
you the technical literary jargon of the narrative voice. That's like literary jargon if you went to like school to be a writer.
Okay. So if I go to school to be a writer, I'm gonna find my so
It's
where's the
just technical.
where's the disconnect here?
Well, I mean, I think the disconnect is I mean, you're kind of like T jump. You're just on like autopilot to be argumentative or something, and like especially if it's
I
about
don't
you.
really see myself as having argued anything, merely sought clarification. So to me, it's inconsistent to say narrative voice and hero journey because I don't, because my own narrative voice wouldn't include, in my own view, a hero journey. That's not me trying to disagree with you. I'm just, maybe the
Yeah,
only
so
way to
that's
do
why I
it
said
is to
your
say
your
something in the
your
hero
own
voice.
point
Fine.
of looking at it is irrelevant.
Well,
So
if it's
okay, yeah,
me who's going to be the one writing, it matters.
from your perspective, you don't see it like a hero's journey, but the reader could see it like your hero's journey. So
And
like I understood
why do this?
immediately when you
So,
said it.
and the reader needs to see it like a hero's journey because that's the template for all appealing
No,
literature.
they may not. I'm saying it's your narrative voice, and one way to interpret the narrative voice is as the hero's journey. So just because I was talking about my essay in the hero's journey, I was making that point, and for whatever reason, the hero's journey doesn't sit well with you, or even to abstract that you have some sort of dissonance or what I'm calling identity crisis. That you're just the mention of abstracting to call it a hero's journey is causing you some sort of dissonance, as opposed to you saying like, yeah, I could see from an abstract level that no matter how I frame myself, it could be understood as a hero's journey. Just like life in general, like a life narrative in general could be understood as a hero's journey.
It could be understood that way.
But either way, I mean, narrative voice is the technical term. Hero's journey is something else. That's uh, usually that, I mean, that's a Joseph Campbell's monomyth, and saying the monomyth could be interpreted of any journey, and just think because it's just a simple three step process, and at the simplest level of a writer has something to share, and possibly you're arguing with some metaphysical way that most people wouldn't appreciate or agree with, but basically you acquired the knowledge. So there's the basic three part where there's the you historically in the past that didn't have this knowledge, then there's the you that did something to acquire the knowledge, and then there's the you that's sharing the knowledge now. And that's the simplest form of the hero's journey. That's the simplest
Is there
form.
a version where the knowledge is always there and then it gets transformed and then it's still there, but it's also there in another form? Is there one of those?
Not really. I mean, a lot of times the hero's journey is
Because
considered
that's what
cyclic,
it's like for me. So it's very boring.
but that's your own self interpretation.
Uh, as opposed to what? I mean, anything other than what I just said is going to be, I don't want to say a
As opposed
lie,
to like
but not honest.
as opposed to like the top of the roster, you were born, you didn't know this stuff, you did something to know this stuff, and now you're sharing the stuff that you know. So maybe you have some other like no, like like I was born knowing this stuff. Um, generally most people aren't going to understand it that way, or
That's fine, and I'm fine with that. The question is, what's the ahimsa way to present that? And that's what the conversation is about. That's why I don't see it as us disagreeing. I just see it as you presenting me different positions on ahimsa that I'm considering, and I appreciate it. So,
yeah,
just to
so
say,
just this universal hero's journey applied to the accumulation of a knowledge or skill that you're sharing, and that forms your narrative voice. That hey, I'm Jen, and at one point I was a little girl who didn't know this stuff, and then I did something that now I know this stuff, and now I'm here to share it.
so lie. I worry about that because then it's like giving other people unrealistic expectations about what they can accomplish, and I don't want that. I want people to get something. I want them to get whatever they can.
Yeah, but so then if you're in a say the identity crisis where you're not going because you're in an identity crisis.
Me not having the kind of identity you want me to have may not be a crisis.
Well, I was saying you're in crisis because you don't have a well-formed identity. That's why it's a crisis. It's not my crisis, it's your crisis.
It's a crisis in the sense that my writing sucks as a result. And
Yeah,
I'm
because you
thinking,
don't have a well-defined identity. That's what I'm saying by
well,
definition.
I
You're in
do have that though, but I don't think it's a good idea to talk about it because I think it's going to confuse people more likely than it's going to confuse people than it's going to like non-confuse them. So I don't want to say something unless there's a more probability of less confusion as a result of me saying it than not. So that's why I'm very not wanting to talk about it.
yeah, and so sometimes you could just, if you have established expertise, you could just share your expertise. And then the question of how you acquire your expertise is, usually relevant. People are going to know, but possibly people just, okay, the expertise is established and I'm learning from this source because I'm want to learn the subject and this person has established expertise. So if you're lacking the narrative voice because you don't have, the we'll call the hero's journey where it's an understandable process of who this person is, what they went through to acquire the expertise and why they're sharing it, to the just like, well, I'm the expert and I'm sharing it. And so occasionally, like if you could actually establish your expertise, but then you have difficulty in that your expertise is not actually established. And then say, well, how would
Depends what the expertise is. It depends what
can
the
you actually
claim is.
establish your expertise without a hero's journey? And possibly not. So, I mean, maybe
That's
through dem
absolutely do you realize how, comical that sounds? Like, literally sounds like something out of a comic book. Superman won't be seen as the hero until he does these journeys. Hercules has gotta do these heroes
no, I mean,
defeats.
you're the one who's, I mean, whatever reason, when you hear the word hero, you think comic book.
Well, you're saying a hero's journey, I get what it is. I get what a
Hero's
hero's journey
journey
is. It's just that I
is
don't feel that that is
applicable to
I
all
can't relate to
everybody.
that. I can't relate to that personally. So, can we modify it
And
so that
then
I
for
can?
because like every time I say the word hero, you think comic book. And it's like, no, hero in the simple level that you gained mastery over something. You took the hero's journey, you worked on something and you achieved. You don't have to be like, comic book hero. You worked on something and you achieved the result. And now you're back to share it. That's all I'm saying in the
Tinkle
simplified.
asks, "What happens if no one wants to listen?" Well, you already know there, bud. You already know you're in that version of Clown World, bud.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate reality. And so, say in some circumstances, you don't need to establish expertise. I mean, like generally, like I hire a plumber. I mean, sometimes you just open up the phone book and call, or there's an accreditation, but still expertise usually has to be established. And
Yeah.
just the establishment of expertise is a hero's journey in and of itself. So it's like, I don't believe that you have expertise. I want you to establish it. So just forcing you to establish your expertise in and of itself is the hero's journey. And
Alrighty.
that's your narrative arc. And it's saying so you're an identity crisis where you're just like, accept my expertise without me establishing it. And it's saying like, no, no one's going to accept your expertise if it's not established.
I get
But
it. Yeah.
in a weak form of, even just the establishment of the expertise could be seen as the hero's journey. But, without your actual journey, but just the establishment of your expertise could be sufficient. So if you're going to write textbook style, dry, um, impersonal information, you could attempt to do it without establishing your expertise. Like I mentioned in, the book on rhetoric of unknown authorship that is still widely quoted today, and it's unknown. The origin was the person an expert. Maybe Cicero wrote the book, but now there's this book that's one of the most widely quoted, used books that's of unknown origin. So, like, is it possible that you could just write this book, and not even you don't even have to say it was you. Just put it out there, and
I
it's
would
going to be
like to
so.
say it's me. That's fine. I don't think an anonymous book is a. I don't like that because then it gives the impression that the author is ashamed to be associated with the writing.
Yeah, so I mean, because your identity crisis, you don't have a narrative voice, and it's going to make it very difficult for you to write without a narrative voice. So most likely you have to resolve your identity crisis, and if your identity crisis is unresolvable, um, it's possible that you could. It'll be very difficult, but it's possible you could develop a narrative voice even without resolving your identity crisis, and your narrative voice would include your identity crisis and why it's unresolvable. Like, I'm Jen,
Yeah.
and I have an irresolvable identity crisis, and here's the reason why I have an irresolvable identity crisis, and then that's your narrative arc.
Yep. I like
And
that one.
I mean, it's basically technical, and they're kind of like categories you have to fit into. So you don't have a well-defined identity. So, according to my understanding of identity theory, that means you're in identity crisis. I'm not saying like a crisis hotline or something like you're going to kill yourself, God forbid. Just means that you don't have.
No, no, I don't think you're saying that. I understand what you mean.
Well, I went through it. It's like identity crisis just means you don't have a resolved identity. So you're still in the crisis phase until you resolve your identity. And if you're saying that your identity is irresolvable, or at least is resolved to you, but you can't share it, which will put you still an irresolvable identity.
I can share it. I just don't think it's a good idea because it's going to confuse people.
Yeah, so you have to.
That's all.
So
I'm not
within
thinking
that,
about myself in this. I'm
within
worried
that,
about
you
other
say,
people.
like a lot of entertainers are like that, and just like, we'll just shut up and sing, or like, God forbid, shut up and strip. Like no one, like, of course you're in identity crisis, but we don't care. Just shut up and sing, shut up and perform, and conceivably that could be expertise in physics, like computer. Just shut up and code. Like, I don't care about, I just want the result, and you're the person producing this result. Like, you do it, you'll get paid. Um, and to some extent, you could resolve your identity crisis and have the narrative arc of by establishing expertise. And it's like that still requires a narrative arc and hero's journey. You don't have to. You could be in identity crisis, but still, through a hero's journey, establish expertise. That I'm this person in identity crisis who has an unresolved identity. However, I have done the work to acquire expertise, and I've established that expertise, and you could trust that I'm sharing this expertise, and regardless of my identity crisis. So you could go about in that direction, or you could try to establish an identity within your identity crisis, where your identity is your identity crisis, and it becomes understandable to the audience that I have an unresolved identity, and here's why my identity is unresolved, in a way that's understandable to the audience. But it's like, if you're right, you're giving over information, there's no way around the hero's journey. You have to establish your expertise, and that will take the form of a hero's journey. And from the
Do we have
simplest
some sort of
definition.
precedent where somebody established? I'm thinking like
I'm
Isaac
saying the
Newton. How
simplest
did
form
Sir
of
Isaac Newton have a hero's journey?
the
Wasn't he some
simplest
sort of
form of simplest
recluse?
form of hero is expertise. You're a hero because because you have expertise. That's what made you a hero, and so your hero's journey is the establishment of your expertise. So, like, why are you a hero? Well, because I have expertise, and so your hero's journey is the establishment of that expertise. That's the minimum. Otherwise, you I mean, just generally, you can't. No one's going to learn from you if they have an established credibility, and you establish credibility through the hero's journey of how you became credible.
Which is by establishing my credibility.
Yeah, and establishing your credibility will include a journey, and even if you're not going to explain how you became an expert, minimally it'll be the journey of itself is how you established your expertise, even if you don't explain how you acquired
Well,
your
I could say how
expertise.
I established my authority, perhaps, and then expertise could be a type of authority. I could do that.
So, I mean, if you're generally the better narrative arc, hero's journey will explain how you acquired your expertise. But if you can't share how you acquired your expertise, you will still have a journey of how you established your expertise.
Well, I have a story of how I established the authority of a physics model, myself being secondary, like a much distant second to the theory itself. Yeah. But obviously, my own credibility is important to just getting the point across with the physics. But don't you think a theory should sort of stand on its own?
When we got you know aquarium in the chat, and I'm not sure he's right. Like Adam Green has established his expertise. Like you haven't established expertise yet, and Adam Green in that sense has his hero's journey where he's just some dude who didn't know about this stuff, started hearing about this stuff, and then did a whole bunch of work and effort till he learned about this stuff, and now he's the one bringing you this information. So, like, no, I don't think like Adam Green is the one who has became the expert on that. You're just maybe a student of Adam Green's. You haven't established expertise, and in that you would also be similar to you were just a regular Christian until one day, like, some reason you started asking questions, and then you started losing your faith, and then you started doing a whole bunch of research, asking a bunch of questions, speaking to a bunch of people, and through this process, you became an expert, and now you're the one giving over the information to the audience. And so that's an Adam Green has a hero's journey, and he's established his expertise. Like, no, I don't think you've actually established expertise yet. And even Jennifer, in that sense, that has she actually established expertise? Maybe
Expertise on what is the question?
Well, I mean that'd be your question. So I'm saying so we were talking. It was meant Aquarium claiming to be an expert on anti-Abrahamic stuff, and he's like, well, I'm not so sure. It's like maybe Adam Green's an expert. I'm not so sure he's an expert. Jennifer, if she's an expert, what's she an expert on? Is it physics? Is it periodic table? And
What I
has
said the other day
has
was
she
that I'm
even
an expert
established
on
that?
the metaphysics of physics, specifically as regards consciousness.
Is that actually established? It was like, no, that's not actually established. You're still
Yeah. And if
you're
anybody
still
wants to if anybody wants to push back on that, it is in that capacity. I'm willing to entertain pushbacks to my authority if the other person is coming forward on the basis of their own authority. Otherwise, not a valid pushback in my school.
yeah, I'm saying you have a degree that's part of the hero's journey, but you're not in your degree is not in what you're claiming to be an expert in.
I know what the domain of my own expertise is, I've actually taken a course in expert witness qualification before. Arguably, I've
Okay, I
taken
mean,
more than one. Anyway,
but in
that
the
doesn't
case you were
actually
saying
matter very much.
you
What
become
matters is what I can establish, and I can certainly establish that I'm an expert in the metaphysics of physics. That wouldn't be much. But
well,
what's hard is entertaining endless underminings from pedants who know nothing. Uh,
well, I'm
so
saying
basically, the point
you
is that if
establish
someone
it
wants to
generally
push
with
back
your
on
comments.
expertise, I'm assuming that they can instantiate their own counter expertise in the exact same domain. That's
Well, I'm
all.
saying you don't establish expertise by knowing more than people who know nothing or know little.
You establish it by being the author, essentially. I'm not talking about expertise. I'm not essentially talking about authority here. Who is the one that is the source of authorship?
And many times these things are conferred by other, not by yourself. And
That's correct. Very correct.
so, and just the general narrative arc is like said the simplest of the three-part process of the person and their essential identity, their working to acquire some special skill, and then their exercise of that special skill.
I didn't acquire the special skill. The special skills I did acquire some special skills, but they were emergent from skills I already possessed. I want to be honest about what I'm even saying here. So you're basically saying it's got to be this way. Got to be a hero's journey.
Well, if you're saying that you were born with these skills and you didn't acquire them, or that the essential Jennifer and like your soul that was around before it entered your body had these skills and it always had these
No,
skills
no.
and it wasn't even
It
from the
had
past.
knowledge, but then there has to be a dependent arising of the knowledge with the conditions of the modern society. That's the part that takes a long time.
And saying
And that's
there
the
was,
part that involves other people and is evolving on an ongoing basis.
I mean, there
So
was
that's
a
there,
Jennifer.
but that's
I
not the
mean,
source.
I'm saying there was a Jennifer in this lifetime in this body
Uh,
that didn't know of the quantum periodic table, and there was a point where you knew about it.
no, I knew I could always find the perfectionment of God in matter. I knew that. And I just figured it was just a matter of really thinking about it enough
From a little girl before you had an
eventually getting
education.
revelation from it. I knew that would eventually work.
I was
Sorry?
saying from a little girl before you had any education, you knew this.
It's part of my being. Yeah. I mean,
You're saying I mean, can you verify it? Can with your sister or mother or people who knew you when you were a little girl
they're
said,
not
yeah,
going to attest to anything because of ahimsa. They don't know fuck all. That I don't judge them knowing would be not a violation of ahimsa.
and if you have a coherent explanation where somehow you didn't go through what's considered the normal standard process because either
I've
you're
done
not,
stuff. I'm sure some people would be like, that's somewhat reminiscent of heroism, but I don't like to give people the wrong impression about what's realistic for their own achievements. And, I don't know.
you're
I
not,
really want people to have a meaningful spiritual evolution.
I mean, your narrative arc is the process that you took. And that's why it's your narrative arc. And I mean, so you're worrying too much about other people and just describing
I'm
your own
doing
narrative
what
arc.
I'm doing for other people, though. So yeah.
I mean, it's the same. I mean, I'm not going to resolve your identity crisis just talking to you now. And, but, whatever narrative arc that you took, once you figure that out, and then you could share it, you'll
It's
have a
all
narrative
figured out.
voice.
I can tell it to you right now. It's just like, is it even worth explaining that? Is anyone going to even understand it? It seems just pointless, like self-indulgent to talk about it if no one's going to understand it.
Well, I mean, you already wasted like half an hour arguing. If it probably would have just been quicker to tell your narrative arc.
But I don't want to because I feel like the chances is gonna be causing himsa is greater than the chances gonna cause ahimsa.
Yeah, so it's saying that your identity confusion, your
There's no
crisis.
confusion. It's not a confusion. It is a reticence to make certain details of myself public, knowing from experience how absolutely pointless certain facts are to someone with no initiation into these concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it's just nonsense because you're saying like there's some, okay, whether there's information you don't want to share, don't share it, but you can't even give a narrative arc.
Exactly. It would not
So
make
just say
sense to
like,
most
okay,
people.
there's certain information that you want to keep private, keep it private. But what's your narrative arc? And you can't even give a narrative arc. It just sounds like a bunch of BS to anybody. You're like, what the hell? You can't even give a narrative arc.
I told you
I understand
why.
if there's certain information you don't want to share, don't share it. But like have some sort of sensical narrative. So just this stupid
Fine.
nonsense where you're being argumentative and it's like, okay, I get it that you certain information you don't want to share. But like so either say I can't give there's so much stuff that I can't share that it precludes me giving a sensical narrative. And so if that's what you're saying, that's what you're saying. That the amount of stuff that you need to hide is so much that you can't even give a sensical narrative.
Um, Sensicality would be a subjective thing, but for a while I was just going with, hey, I'm Jen Sharf and I like physics. That was fine for a while. We could still go with that.
Yeah, but that's for a student of physics, not a teacher of physics.
Well, I guess at some point the student becomes the best student in the class, and then eventually the teacher dies. Natural causes and everything, but
Yeah, but
that's
that's not your
basically how I
narrative.
see it working. It's not a very
You may
exciting narrative, but it's a very reliable narrative.
Well, I was saying that's your narrative, okay, like you went to university, you graduated with honors, um, but
I entered secular society. I suffered greatly.
but you didn't actually establish yourself as a teacher. You have a process and narrative, but your narrative doesn't, um, so just like, I am a person, I found this stuff interesting, I got a degree in it, I
Oh,
worked hard,
the people
I
in my life
performed
could
well,
probably
I
attest to me
kept on
always being a
studying.
teacher. The people in my family would probably agree I've always been a teacher.
So
We could
you, I
get them
mean, so
to
you could
agree to that.
have some sort of like of sensical narrative arc. Maybe it's like Adam Green.
Yeah, I
It's like
like
he has
teaching.
this sensical narrative arc where just like he was an average guy and an average Christian, and then he started looking into conspiracy stuff, and he lost his faith, and he started believing in these called conspiracies, and then he really started researching it. He spent years researching it, started his own show, and now until he became one of the foremost experts on it. So I mean, you have a sensical narrative arc. Like you're Jen, you like physics, you got a degree in it, you worked in the field, you spend your spare time thinking about it. You started a blog writing about it, and you've always had proclivity as a teacher. And you established yourself as a teacher. That's a narrative arc.
Great.
And so if you have information beyond that that needs to be kept private, that's still sufficient that you have a sensical narrative arc that you're the girl that had a proclivity towards teaching and always liked physics, got a degree in it, worked on it, spends your spare time thinking about it, started a blog, started writing about it, and now you're putting yourself out there teaching it. And that's sufficient as a narrative arc.
Okay, I'm glad we worked that out. That is a big relief.
You could have information that you don't want to share, but at least you have like a coherent narrative arc.
It's more about I want people to have realistic expectations about their own achievement. And so if you're coming from already knowing versus learning for the first time, it's just not the same expectation. And I want to prepare people for success by
At least you have an
managing
I that wants.
expectations
You have a narrative arc that there's an I that wants.
pursuant to particular goals I have self-instantiated.
So I mean, you have X, Y. There's this I that wants, but okay, there's an I that wants. So the I that wants is part of your narrative arc.
That
And so
wouldn't be good to
there's
bring
this
into it,
I
though.
that
No, that's where the problems start. I don't wanna bring that part into it. Let's just keep it to, "I like teaching do to do."
well, I mean, so you're the one who said that I want. You want to make sure that people don't get confused.
What am I gonna
So
start I'm gonna start referring to myself in the third person? No. I'm gonna say "I," referring to the conventional "I." Just because I have transcended non-duality does not mean I don't get to instantiate a sublocalized "I" on
yeah, so
occasion.
there's a
To refer to
you
it,
that
I'm in
desires
secular society, it's my right.
there's a you that desires people not to be confused. And so if that's part of your narrative arc that
I don't
you
mind confusion, Doovid. Doovid, it's not the confusion. Temporary confusion is actually sometimes good. What matters is that the overall probability of ahimsa goes up. That's the most important thing. So if
because
it's a temporary
somehow
confusion that
you
is
sharing your
usually
ideas
resolved in a higher
is going to
knowledge,
make people think that they're capable of more than they're actually capable of, and that's going to increase him just by you sharing some ideas. And because you're so great and awesome, god forbid,
please.
and did this stuff without working, and these other, these plebs and nobodies are going to think, like foolishly, that they
I don't
also
want to
can achieve
mislead
what you
people to a
achieved,
point where they
when there's
become
no way
disillusioned in their
that
own
they could
development and
possibly
then they
achieve
can't
what you
get somewhere
achieved.
because I was selfishly self-promoting some dumb LARP personal narrative that I didn't even agree with in the first place. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so there's the general narrative. There's the you that worked really hard to learn the stuff and try your best to understand it, and now you're sharing it. So you're the one with the identity confusion, adding some LARP to that, as opposed to the general typical hero's narrative to the you that worked really hard uh, to study and understand this stuff, and now you're here to teach it. So if you want to add a LARP to it, that seems to be your problem. That you can't just say, like, there's the I that worked really hard to study and understand this stuff, and now I'm sharing it with the general public.
What stuff is it that I worked really hard to understand, though?
Whatever it is you're sharing.
I didn't work hard to understand that, though.
So now you're adding some LARP.
No,
And
I
you're saying
worked
if it's
hard
not a
to
LARP, if it's
understand
not a LARP, but you can't
civilization
explain
right
it.
now. I worked hard to understand certain facets of modern society right now. I did not work hard to achieve what I already know, though. So maybe there's a way to get it. It's awesome. But assuming that the way I do what I do is
Therefore, if other
replicable is
people,
not realistic.
it's going to cause damage because of your awesomeness. And if you start sharing, if people realize that you did this without working, and no matter how hard they tried, they could never do what you did, that somehow there's
I'm
going to be
giving them
damage
the
caused
knowledge on
because
the
they're going to
option that it
falsely
is
think
actually I have
that
no
they could.
idea if it's possible. I don't know, but if I want to maximize the possibility. I want to maximize the probability that it's possible, okay? That's where I'm coming from and realistic expectations in my experience, that's the way to get it. And whatever realistic expectations is not realistic to expect to be able to discover things the way someone who already knows something discovers things if you're just starting out. That's what I'm saying. So it's a hero's journey in the sense of there's good stuff that happens in the process of it, but it's a not really a hero's journey in the sense of what people want. What I think people want about what I know isn't really what I learned. It's what I already knew that people would probably find interesting. So all this Jen Sharp stuff would have been stuff I learned in this life. It wouldn't. I would judge that as an uninteresting from like theological perspective. And you're saying, okay, well, you have to make it part of the facts of what you're presenting because, and I agree with you. It's just a question of how do we do that with ahimsa, and I'm not sure painting me as a hero journey is a himsa. If anyone in the audience wants to chime in, that would be great. But I'm not arguing with you in the sense that I think you're wrong. You may well be right, and I'm actually mistaken here. I think it's sort of a synthesis that we need to get to possibly.
Yeah, I mean, you probably just have confusion in terms, like just because you hear the word hero and it evokes something in you that you clouds your understanding.
I just don't feel like a hero.
Well, that's what I said, just the process, this thing that you're giving your narrative arc, and I expressed it in the hero's journey, and it doesn't matter how you feel. You're saying you're a hero as if you have something to share, and so in that sense, that you either have something to share or you don't. If you have something to share, then at least in that aspect, you're a hero.
Okay.
And if you don't, then you're not going to have a narrative voice, and it's going to be uninteresting. You're not going to be able to connect to the reader that there's I who knows something. I'm sharing it. Like I'm a loser. I suck. You should just kill me, but read my stuff anyways.
Did I say I was a loser and I sucked? Are you imitating me right now?
I mean, that's what you sound like. I was saying, okay,
Really?
like
Oh
you're
my
saying, if
god!
like I'm a loser
Wow.
and I suck, you're like really like I should just die. But yeah,
Well,
at
I
the
don't know if
same
I go
time,
that far.
I'm trying to write, and like I have this really great stuff
I
that
think you're projecting a
that
bit.
I think
Like
you should think
I,
about
I
and
feel
would
like oh my god.
benefit the public at large. So saying that you have to be a hero to write because you have to have something to give over. If you're not a hero, then you don't have something to give over. So like if you had a kid, you would say, "Well, I'm a loser, but I'm still your mom. So I'm going to tell you about myself because I'm still your mom, and like relatively, I'm a loser, but you should listen to me because I'm your mom." But like you're writing for your own kid who should listen to you even if you're a loser. You're writing for a general audience that shouldn't listen to you if you're not a hero.
Hmm. Very interesting points.
And even if your own kid, you're saying like, God forbid, like, I'm sorry, like I had you and I'm a loser. Like, like I try my best to be a good mom, but I can't because I'm a loser.
That'd be a weird thing to say.
Yeah, so I'm just saying the normality of the hero's journey. That the mom's gonna has the parent has something for their kid. I know
Well,
something about this world. I know something about this world because I've taken this journey already.
right. Knows
And
how
like,
to
okay,
be.
I may not have done that well on the journey. And so you tell your kid, like, relatively, like my life didn't work out so good.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to tell you the best from what I know, even though the best from what I know is not very good. And it's very likely that you're going to hear stuff from other people that's substantially better than what I have to tell you. But I mean, if you're trying to put yourself out, so I mean, if you're a mother, you have to do your best. So if that's like
It's
you have a
really
kid, you have,
unfathomable that that convo would happen between a mom and her kid.
well, it might in other terms, but or it might be understood. You're saying the child could intuit that their parent's a loser, or God
That's
forbid.
kind of mind blowing. That's mind blowing that you see things that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, because there's the comparative self. So if there's the
Okay.
parent that can't provide for their kid, and there's the kid that's unprovided for, and then at some point, saying the parents like I can't provide, but you go out into the other world and you be provided for by other people, then you could see your parent is the loser who can't provide. Someone else could provide for you. Your own parent can't provide for you. Why could this other person provide, but not your parent? Because your parent's a loser. I was making the point that it's still your parent, that okay, you have to give something over to your kid even if you have nothing to give. But there's still kind of the hero's journey, the mother that bore the kid. You're like, okay, well, it was a mistake. I got pregnant from your father. I didn't want to have you, but I had you anyway, so here you are. And now I can't really do anything for you. But there's still the hero's journey, the saying that the mother had to have got impregnated and had the kid. So there's still some level of the hero's journey. But saying that's a weak hero's journey when you're writing, saying so your writing is like your kid. And you're saying that, but if you're writing, generally you should have something to give over. Like the reason I'm writing is because I have something of worth to give over. So it's not like just your kid that like you're trying unsuccessfully to provide for your kid because you're a loser. So you're saying that you're not just trying unsuccessfully to provide for your kid because you're a loser. You have to have the hero's journey that you actually have something of worth to give over. And then you have your due diligence. Something, God forbid, we're saying that, well, how do you know what you're doing is of worth? Jennifer, leave the meeting. Still going? So how do you know what you have is of worth? And it's saying because you did your due diligence, you you studied, you looked around, and you know what's out there. So that's your scientific review. You write a scientific paper, and you say that here's the current state of knowledge, here's what's known, and here's what uniquely I'm adding. That's what I'm saying. Well, how come you're not published? And that's the general current scientific method of publication, where you're talking about you looked around, um, doing the due diligence, what's known, and I mean, so if it's like Aquarians, like another counter Semite or anti-biblicist, and so you could be like a low level person, like, well, I'm just telling you basically what a lot of people are saying. Like, I'm not really adding anything unique. Really, there's 1,000 people that are saying the exact same thing, and it could be like a rabbi or priest. Saying I'm just a generic local rabbi. I don't have any special insights, but I have enough expertise to be like a local religious figure, and really the rabbi around the corner or in the other town is just as competent or qualified as me, but I have the basic qualifications to perform this service. And so it's like a physics teacher. Well, I'm not a great physicist. I don't have like this some great discovery that's going to be published, but I could teach you calculus. I could get you up to a certain level of understanding, like a curriculum that like like college level physics and calculus.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that.
And so like for the scientific paper, you have to actually. So when Jennifer said, "Okay, I'm a physics teacher," you don't have to have something new. You'd be like, "Well, like I've mastered the content, and I could get you up to this level in a core curriculum." And so like college freshman calculus, physics, no problem. I got that. Any question you have, I'll be able to answer, no problem. Versus like a scientific paper, you're saying, no, I'm adding something new that wasn't known before. And then the format, not only adding something new that wasn't known before, I'm going to demonstrate it by doing a historical review and going over what's currently known and showing what I'm adding, how that fits in with what's currently known and is new with what's currently known, and then an analysis of the direction this might take future knowledge in now that I've added what wasn't previously known. So it's the hero's journey in like a scientific article isn't much narrative. There's not much biography in it. There's some like of establishment of expertise, but it's more the establishment of what you're adding and the establishment of I'm adding something new. I'm going to demonstrate that I'm adding something new by doing an exhaustive review of the current state of knowledge. I'm going to clearly explain what I'm adding new, and I'm going to analyze how what I'm adding new affects what's known. But scientific writing is generally dry because it doesn't have a narrative arc. It doesn't explain who am I that came up with this stuff and adding it. All you're doing is adding it and demonstrating that you're actually adding something new. But the more popular writing, you have a narrative arc where you're connecting to the audience, the I that accomplished it and sharing and connecting to you. So I say this is, I would say, a basic established wisdom. Like it comes out because that's like week in review. It comes out as argumentative of me and Jennifer, but this is basically like an established, well-known thing. And if Jennifer has a unique way of looking at the world or her own metaphysics that makes something that's largely established, a well-established process, not fit in with her metaphysics, then I mean, you have multiple truth hypotheses. You could try to analyze it. Is this process contradictory according to her worldview? Is the does the process also apply in her worldview, or uh, or to say if I
I
can't
can see why a
understand.
lot of stuff I would do would seem contradictory because of my understanding of the ahimsa principle. Might be frustrating. Sorry about that.
So if you can't establish your worldview
The
and you
thing
have,
is, like, what, like,
I march to my own drummer and I can't, no one else is going to understand why or how I do things. Um, you still function together with other people to say, I insist on marching to my own drummer. And no, unfortunately, I can't explain it to you. Um, well, can you still work together with other people?
I think I can. You tell me. I do think there's problems, you know, just generally with cooperation, which I can explain. I don't know if that's what people want me to do right now, but I mean, it's sort of like you can describe something that happens, and then but not quite the same thing to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Aquarian. He needs to know multiple truth hypotheses. Like, okay, I know astrology, therefore I know more than Doooovid knows about his own faith. Even though in the Talmud, say, Ein Mazel B'Yisrael, there's no astrology to Jews. The Jews aren't affected by astrology. So you say, like, no, I disagree. You are affected by astrology. I understand the astrology. And I understand how you're affected. And therefore, you don't know what, that's, you're implanting your worldview on other people. So you're saying that my understanding of the world doesn't just explain my worldview, it explains how everything operates. And you operate according to my understanding, whether you know it or like it or not. And that's,
Everyone thinks that, Doovid.
well, no, I mean, weak minds think like that. Saying there's a
Well,
tendency. I mean,
I
really,
think there's a
that's
tendency
really
to thinking
solipsism.
that for everybody.
Yeah, I mean that's the tendency of solipsism, but no, it's weak minds, and saying most great minds have posited something like a multiple truth hypothesis. And that's why I've mentioned that there's so many similar ideas all over the place, where it's saying there's multiple conflicting ways of looking at things, and you understand your own worldview, and you can see the limitations in your own worldview. If you can't see the own limitations in your own worldview, but you usually, presumably, the person is in the best vantage point to see the weaknesses in their own worldview. I have to,
Do you got a
for me to see the
single
weaknesses in
shred
the
of
world,
evidence for that? Any evidence for that? It would seem the person in the worldview would be the least good at judging its bias.
it's weaknesses, because I know the results that I would like to achieve and can't achieve because I know the weaknesses of my own worldview. So, like, I
Okay.
know the failings of
That
my own
doesn't
worldview.
follow that most people transcend the weaknesses of their worldview or that all worldviews have what you're calling weaknesses.
Well, I mean, on the personal level, like of the I myself, I know my failings better than anybody else because I know what I want to do and accomplish and where I fail that I don't share with other people. So you could see me and you could see, oh, good, this guy's a failure. This guy's got a lot of problems, but I you know introspect and observe my own mind and desires and see my own failings. And if it's a worldview, I know what my system fails to predict correctly. I know
Sure.
all of the predictions that I make that were inaccurate. So like I didn't share. Most people don't share the failings of their worldview, but they know the failings of their own worldview. So you should know the failings of your own worldview better than anybody else because worldviews
Not
generally
everybody can understand how to apply it. Not everybody can
constantly
understand how
fail.
to apply it in a way that isn't self-destructive. There's the problem.
Just on a simple level, worldviews constantly
Simply,
fail.
that's what it is. Not everyone can figure out how to apply it non-self-destructively. There's the problem with it.
Um, well, and it's really just a simple humility to say on any given
There
level,
you go. I just told you what
worldviews
the problem is.
constantly fail. A person knows the failings of their own worldview because the worldviews constantly fail.
Right. And one of the failings of this technology is that it can be self-destructive if it's implemented incorrectly. So there's a problem with it right there on the face of it. So I know shortcomings of it.
We're saying that worldviews constantly fail.
There's also
Oh,
there's attributes of materiality itself, which sort of set forth limits on knowability. We consider those to be more important to contemplate than anything subjective, as it's just not particularly interesting.
which is basic empiricism. That
I don't really think empiricism is basic.
we're saying that my observation and understanding of the world is flawed, and I know the flaws of my understanding and observation of the world better than anybody else. I could portray myself to have some sort of perfected understanding of the world, but generally, you're saying like a enlightened or actualized or educated person knows the limitations of their own power, and then you say, "Well, this is a system that I work with. I know the failings of work, and then understand that there's multiple systems." And then so this tendency towards solipsism
Don't know what
fades
you mean
with
by that.
the tendency to think that your worldview is not only correct, but it's the explanation. I mean, it's not the exact definition of solipsism, but just saying that
So
that
you're saying you
my
think
mind
your
is the only
worldview
thing
is
that
right,
exists.
and you're saying you don't see any flaws in your worldview, and I'm saying I just listed a flaw in my worldview. Do you reject that it's a flaw, that it can be mismanaged?
Well, you should see the flaws in your worldview more clear than anybody else.
I just stated one. Well, I don't. I mean, I don't know that I don't dwell on the flaws in my worldview per se when I'm contemplating things.
We don't have to dwell in the flaws, but it's saying that the worldview is inherently incapable of producing many results or providing certain knowledge or
A worldview
correctly.
cannot provide knowledge. Okay, so we disagree on that because I
I
think it
didn't
can.
say doesn't or that correctly provide many forms of knowledge.
I would say the only thing that can confer knowledge is a worldview.
That might be true, but it's saying that it can't correctly confer many types of knowledge or many much knowledge. It should be obvious, like there's many things going on that you don't know about. There's many things going on that it's impossible for you to know about. You have to sleep at night. There's other sides of the world. There's stuff phenomenon that is beyond your grasp.
Okay.
And that should be obvious to any given person that they know the limitations of their own mind.
That is not honest, is it? Literally nobody knows that. Most people don't even think about it that way. They think of themselves as a person having experiences inside a volume. And that volume has some sort of meaning that exists transcendentally, and then are terrified of the idea that maybe it doesn't.
I mean, I have a
You go up to the average person and say, "Hey, what's the limits to your cognition?" They're not going to answer that in a way that is going to make you think, "Ooh, that was a compelling answer."
when there's the obvious limits to the sense perception.
There aren't obvious limits to sense perception. That's why they have to be studied endlessly.
Well, there are. They're saying the
No, there
obvious limit.
aren't.
I'm looking out my window right now. I could see a few hundred feet. I know that beyond a few hundred feet, I can't see more. And like, okay, I know the basic layout of my neighborhood, like even most of the major streets, in even minor streets in a few miles, so tens of miles. I know the major streets, but even a mile in the various directions, I don't even know the minor streets, let alone most of the people living within a few hundred feet of me. I don't even know them. Like the
So
fact
what's
that
the point of this monologue
it's an
about
obvious
knowability? The
limit to a
obvious
person's
limits of
perception.
okay.
Anybody knows the limits to their perception. Anybody knows that within a few hundred feet of them, there's people that they don't know. There's phenomenon that they haven't observed. There's data that they don't know. It's obvious limits to it. And the person's like, I could know it all. He's like, no, it's an obvious limit that you're not going to know if you're in a suburban area, you're not going to know everyone within a square mile of you. Everybody knows that. There's not nobody thinking there that they have the cognitive capacity to know
Okay, so in my
all the.
system, you're asking about what are the limits on knowability. I guess it would be the uncertainty of language and measurement devices.
So I'm saying of sense perception is extremely obvious that
It's
there's a
not,
limit.
though.
How is it not obvious? You're saying
Phenomena have tons of unusual perception techniques. So there's
the
unusual
what?
phenomena, the pariksha, the standard inference, perception, and so forth. Those are one of them is indirect cognition. You'd call that unusual perception. Literally, that's how it's defined.
Yeah, but the
Indirect.
mind might have
It's
special
advantaged
capabilities,
because it is less reductive of the waveform to perceive something indirectly. It's actually
but
quite a
you
treasured
still
skill.
is going to have an obvious limit to your perception.
Of course, there's limits to perception. Of course there are, but limits to perception and the limits of a theory and the limits of a methodology, it's all a little bit different. So I'm sort of at the stage of like, how do I even frame it in the first place? Because I want to put it to people in a way that they can get a result
Which
out
is
of.
silly ego. I don't know why the hell you're arguing.
I'm not arguing.
It's just like physical laws. Like, okay, you study physics, but there's so many things right in your vicinity that you have no idea how they work. And like any given person sees that on a constant basis. They're like, okay, I drive my car, I use my computer. I know I don't know how this works. I have all these
Okay,
books
sure.
on my desk that I haven't read yet. Like just the obvious limits
Okay.
of my
The limit of what I'm
perception, of my
presenting. Yeah,
cognibility,
okay.
of my
Oh
understanding.
my God.
That
What
you
I'm
don't have to look
presenting.
more than a few feet. You don't have to, to see that there's countless things that are beyond your ability to explain or understand.
Great. It's the metaphysics of physics from a minimal complexity, binding field, progressive, emergent, mechanical, what you could call an ontology. But it's just a way to generate models,
Since I mean,
more of a process than
you're
anything.
just saying like, oh, I like there's I, and that I understand everything, and there's my worldview, and everything operates according to my worldview.
Well, no,
Is
it's not enough to explain why a book is good because that implies that what I've said is about the complexity of a human, which it's not. It's about the metaphysics of physics, which doesn't speak to the complexity of psychology. It doesn't speak to basically any human
I'm not even
construct.
talking good and bad. I'm talking the limits of a worldview and the limits of knowledge.
I'm giving you the limits of the worldview I'm putting forward. I'm saying it's only really a commentary on the metaphysics of physics. So that would be the domain of the expertise. And outside of that, well, there may be some things that are not terrible, but that main domain of expertise should be considered that.
I mean, this stuff is really pretty simple. And it could be because Jennifer's a woman, it's very difficult for her to separate herself to think about it. But I mean, you want to say there's an I that knows and understands things, and that knowledge and understanding is extremely limited relatively. So there's I who knows and understands quite a bit, but the I that knows what is understandable or knowable knows the limits of what I know. So just like in perception, you know how big the environment is, you know how little of it you experience it. You know how large the corpus of knowledge is. You know how limited the knowledge that I have of that corpus of knowledge.
A lot of knowledge floating around there.
Yeah, so if there's a more accurate assessment, so you just like a solipsism where or some just mania where a person's like I know everything, even though that's obviously false. And let alone like a worldview, like a worldview, like I know how the world works. Well, I know quite a few things about how the world works, but actually I know more about what I don't know about how the world works than I know relative,
That's a
because I'm
Socratic
an
way of
enlightened
looking at
person.
things.
I
That's a
know.
Socratic way of looking at things. I'm an integral mystic, so I'm not
Well, I mean,
really able to look at things that way primarily.
Socrates was the wisest of all people because he knew how little he knew.
Yeah, well, to me, that's a contradiction. So I don't
And
attend
you have in
to
your own mind, like
embrace contradictions at a
like I
paradigm
am
level.
God, you're Mayavadi, and therefore I know everything, even though you know very little.
You've got Socrates standing in as a stand-in for a Mayavadi right now, based on your reasoning. So it's your own fallacy that you're
No, I'm
pointing to
talking
here.
objective knowledge levels, that there's the I that knows,
And an
and then there's,
assertion like "I know that I know nothing" in my worldview is self-refuting
I
and
just quoted
therefore
Socrates.
enormously
I was saying that I
uh,
know that there's a
egomaniacal.
lot more to be known than what I know.
Well, that's true, but I don't think that's really how people take that quote. So it seems like you're saying that I'm saying my thing says everything when I said what I wanted to speak on was the metaphysics of physics in particular. Because that's what it would appear to be as a thing. And the other stuff would be not important.
Well, not important to you, or whatever the
Not important to me. And
statement.
if other people say, hey, it's important for these reasons, I'll be like, cool. Because if someone actually bothers to put the argument forward, it's like, try it out.
So saying that I don't have a worldview, I have multiple worldviews, and I
You're talking
use
about yourself
multiple.
now?
Yeah, like I don't
Okay,
have a worldview, I have multiple worldviews.
sure.
I perceive the world through multiple worldviews, and I recognize that different of my worldviews produce better or worse understandings for different types of knowledge. And then even to analyze the elements of my worldview and why in different situation has more successes or failures, and then to try to understand somebody else's worldview and say from the okay that I'm enlightened enough that I don't just have one worldview, I have multiple worldviews, and maybe all people, that's how the universal human mind operates, then to understand other people's worldviews. If you say there's just a level of
Well, you're presuming a lot of development at the level of a worldview on a personal level that just for the majority of people isn't there. You're cognizant of the concept of a worldview. Most people are operating
we
on
have a
sheer
universal
instinct.
theory of mind. So I'm saying there's a universal theory of mind that these processes in my mind are probably comparable to the processes in all minds.
So you're thinking most or all minds have this discrete parallel processing of contradictory worldviews?
Well, I'm saying that's one of my worldviews.
That's one of the
One of my
simultaneous
worldviews. That's one
processing
of
worldviews.
that's one theory of mind. So not just my worldview. It's a common theory of mind. And it's a theory of mind that I use to perceive the world, where I will axiotize, I will presuppose that these mind processes are universal and all minds are going through these same processes.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. Like projection is basically you can't really not do it somehow. It's sort of part of the programming. You can get better at seeing your tendency towards projection, I think, but I don't know if you can really stop it or if that you'd necessarily want to.
Well, you still have multiple worldviews. So saying that's one worldview. I have one worldview that maybe of
I don't
solipsism.
really see it that way at all, just so you know. I think it's cool that you see it that way. I just can't relate. Like
And you're saying
I'd always be imposing a synthetic model on some sort of macro process rather than trying to go through the subjective motivational matrix. So I guess I would see that as a pointless exercise.
well, exercise a worldview.
Well, what are we talking about here? We're talking about getting it out to a big audience? Are we talking about getting it out accurately? Or what's, I feel like I've lost the sort of thread of what we're even talking about in this combo.
We're not just talking hypothetical worldview. So if I wanted to write or share my ideas about worldviews, that would just the generic writing process. I just think we're just talking about worldviews and processing. So you process the world through a worldview, or you process the world through multiple worldviews, and
Hmm.
and you're saying the mind is, if you could stipulate the mind is always processing, or you
Okay.
stipulate that all minds are always processing, not just
Yeah,
my
we just
mind.
say that there's like one of the properties of the mind would be something like processing,
Yeah,
that
we
there's this
stipulate that
intrinsic
not only
churning.
my mind is always processing, it's universal. All minds are always processing.
I think churning is the right word technically, and then processing is a particular type of churning.
Processing is a reverse anthropomorphism.
Could be. I mean, if it is, it's hardly like you can't make it so that everything is something. It'll dilute the meaning beyond recognition.
I mean, you could create a lexicon saying processing is a reverse anthropomorphism, but
Vis-a-vis the computer, you mean?
processing is a type thinking that computers do that maybe humans do, maybe they don't. But the computers definitely process, maybe human minds process. But you
Well, the human mind is doing something.
do the reverse anthropomorphism. I'm saying that human minds are, well, just for the need of a word, using the word processing, even though it's a reverse anthropomorphism, it's saying that minds um, are basically always processing, and simply all minds are basically always processing.
You can just say that's like another way of looking at the vibrational attribute of, attribute of matter in a monistic way. So, yes. That's pretty much, yeah. See, we agree on that, or do we agree on that? Or
What
you
is
just
it processing? It's processing.
that's the thing. There's nothing that it's processing. It is itself the process. What we're doing is we're surjecting a process ontology to crystallize meaning to information front load in such a way that I don't really know how to put it into words, but the chance of a miscommunication basically drops precipitously as a result.
Yeah, so you're saying if you use a reverse anthropomorphization for the purpose of providing a lexicon to describe the process, and then if you're doing introspection from how you observe your own mind working, and then you want to ascribe words for a shared meaning to that process that other people would match with their introspection or psychometrics. So I was just reading today saying like there's multiple foundings of the field of psychology, and many of the founders of the field of psychology really looked at it as the objective study of consciousness. I mean, as the science of consciousness. The psychology was the scientific field of the study of consciousness using the tools available, which was psychometrics and introspection. And then there was later the more practical field of psychology, which is clinical psychology, like medicine, where it's trying to help people through their problems. But just psychology, literally the study of the soul is the study of the mind. And we were talking the last few weeks of related to self and identity. The processes available are basically introspection and psychometrics. You could measure behavior. So there's psychometrics of the product of mind, which would be you measuring mental output, usually through writing or verbal, and then there's behavioral observation, which is I'm not. I don't think psychometrics includes behavioral observation, but basically that's all you have is introspection, psychometrics, and behavioral observation, and you make
And
a theory.
promenade.
Are those different?
Well, inference is established like on a per case basis. So
Well, I'm saying
yeah,
that's
there's
going to be
tons
within the
more
realm of
than that.
introspection, which is something that's happening within your own mind, and then has to be given over, and then what's given over
Most of my
would be.
reasoning is not really about what my internal experience is. That's my internal experience is part of it, but not ever really it's not something I've ever until now seen really the value of talking about as such.
I mean, you're just using different words, but I'm saying anything that happens within your own mind is introspection, and anything that is sharing your mind with others is psychometrics. So if you want to say
Mm.
pramanas in that sense, it's a form of introspection because it happens within your own mind.
And it's verified
And then when
externally.
you share
It's verified externally though. So
through psychometrics,
okay. Well, if you
and the
want to define
pramas
it that way, fine.
doesn't change the foundation of psychology. The pramas would be still it's in the realm of introspection, and that would have to be verified through psychometrics.
They're they're defined as proof modalities. So like I don't know what you want to call that, but that's
But I'm
what it's
saying
called.
that it doesn't change the foundation of Western psychology, that it's still a form of introspection. And for whatever reason, you're understanding the word introspection why you want to classify something different, but something that's happening internally in the mind. And then when you give it over to be shared, then that would be psychometrics.
See, it's hard because I see psychology as really secondary to what I'm putting forward, which is a metaphysical, physical treatise, which obviously, due to meltdowns that are happening constantly, there does have to be some element of psychology for managing predictable responses to some of these teachings, but that doesn't make it a psychometric thesis, does it?
Well, yeah, because
I'm
anything
confused.
that you have to, I mean, so if you say that metaphysics is human independent, that you're just saying that truth claims that are mind independent, but they're still a product of your mind and they're still shared through communication, and communication is measured in the form of psychometrics. That the communication is the output of mind. And so like measuring communication, psychometrics. So if you want to say you want to think about a metaphysics independent of introspection, you're saying that your metaphysics is a product of your introspection. But you want to say that your
Introspection is
metaphysics,
necessary to convey certain truths. Metaphysical, I already knew that stuff. Form, didn't know that stuff. That's the periodic table. That had to be discovered and churned out. It's very, very gradual stuff. I've got it on the screen now. So, and you're saying pramana is necessarily, uh, what did you define it as? Introspective?
introspection.
Is that because the perception is considered authoritative?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with authoritative. I'm just saying that it's a product of mind. I mean, it's not
Everything's
a
a
product.
product of mind,
It's not a product. I mean, it's saying it's a process of mind.
a process of mind.
Or I mean, even a word, but it's saying it's something that happens internally that can't be seen by others. That could introspection.
Okay. Inference is introspective, though.
What's an internal mind mental process or cognitive process?
So to say that means that inference can't be systematized in any way.
It can't be systematized.
Well, if it's an internal process, I don't see how.
Wait,
You're
you're
the
saying to
one
be
saying, "Oh,
systematized. If it be systematized, it can't be
it's mind
measured.
dependent, it's subjective." Okay? So it can't be
Saying to be
systematized.
systematized, it just can't be measured. You can measure the output of mind, the psychometric data that you can measure. You could still systematize introspection.
And then how do you verify if your systematized is correct?
You can't. I mean, you can to some extent through shared introspection by developing a system of processes and then other people through introspections verifying that they use the same systems or introspections. Or in theory, where you would come up with some technique of measuring psychometric output of mind that would verify an internal system that the
Well, that's
output
what the
data.
pramanas are. All these are tests of ability. But the problem with that is the weakness of that is you need someone else who knows how to do pramanas to verify what a person is saying. So in that sense, of course, it's circular, but the experts agree with each other independently. They don't need to necessarily check.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I'm saying it's not something that there's nothing in like Prama that's unique or I mean, its own system might be unique, but it's saying it still fits in the general creation of the field of psychology, and saying that you have really, I said three methods: introspection, psychometrics, and behavioral observation. And maybe there's a better word for behavioral. That's saying
What about
that you
meta-analysis of data?
that's uh that's a form of introspection is done. It's
Okay,
done.
so meta-analysis of data is introspection. Now we're really diluting. This is like conspiracy theorist all over again. We're to the point of the word not meaning the common meaning anymore.
Privately within someone's own mind.
Yeah. And to say that
Right?
meta-analysis of data
Is done
is a
privately
form of
within someone's own
introspection
mind.
is to pretty much dilute the meaning of the term introspection, which, from my understanding, really only applies to like personal, subjective, emotional states.
No, I mean, I'm using the psychological definition. I mean, you
Okay.
might have reasons why you understand the word differently. I'm explaining to you the psychological, just any process that's done in your own mind that can't be observed by others.
The result can be observed. So the fact that the process can't be observed, that's like saying that you can't explain math, therefore your formula is wrong. Why is that logic
No, the
wrong?
result being observed is psychometrics.
The result being observed is stuff like the
Psychometrics.
QMPT and
That's the
knowing
product
stuff
of
that
mind.
nobody can disagree with in particular fields.
When saying you could write out a math formula and saying it's a psychometric, that's a psychometrics, like it's saying that to do a complicated calculated process like a meta-analysis or just a math equation, a person could write out in a communicative form of what they're doing, but that's psychometrics. The process itself, just because the person writes it out or shares it, the process itself occurs privately, unobservably in the person's own mind.
Hmm.
So you could write out what you're doing, but the process itself is still occurring privately in the person's mind,
The point is that is
unobservable.
meta-analysis of data considered an internal, what do you call it, internal mental process? And I think most people would not agree that it is. It's considered a an analysis technique, which is potentially going to go with some sort of Bayesian framework for retrofit, whatever,
Yeah,
fitting or something. I don't know.
if you want to say that it's mind independent, that it's a technique that could be done in the mind or it could be done by a computer. But if it's done by the mind, it's a form of introspection that is done privately and unobservably.
You keep repeating that, and I keep saying that's
Because that's
technically
just the
true for
definition. I don't
everything.
know what the hell your problem you're having with it. That obviously all thought processes occur privately and unobservably within the mind. I don't know what are we arguing about?
Whether
You're saying that
meta-analysis
thought
of large
processes don't
amounts of
occur
data
privately,
counts as
and
that.
just as though I'm using the word introspection to say that any thought process is a form of introspection because it occurs privately and unobservably in the mind.
I'm just saying that I struggle to see how meta-analysis of swaths of data is something that can
Is it
be
a thought
described as
process that
a
occurs
thought process,
privately and unobservably in the mind?
but it is all on paper, laid out in formulas and diagrams and explained. So,
That's psychometrics. I mean, you could write it out on paper, but it doesn't occur on paper, it occurs in the mind, and then you use the paper to communicate it.
so it seems like that would be true for anything.
Yeah, that's why I said you have introspection, psychometric data, and behavioral observation.
Well,
These are
behavioral
this
observation would also be a form of introspection, wouldn't it?
no,
It just
behavior is
sounds
the
like everything
physical
is
thing that
is
the body
introspection.
actually does. So you have behavior, forget the word observation. There's behavior, psychometrics. I mean, it mentioned behavior observation, and behavior is measurable. Introspection is not measurable. Psychometrics is measurable. Behavior is measurable.
Okay.
Psychometrics, any process of the mind occurs privately and unobservably.
Yeah, and meta-analysis of a lot of data mind. So it's no longer just inside your own mind to do meta-analysis of large amounts of data, like reviewing theories in physics and stuff like that.
Yeah, but the actual thought still occurs privately and unobservably in your own mind.
I don't know why you feel the need to keep repeating that. It's completely
Because you
irrelevant.
don't seem to get it. I don't know what the hell you're arguing about.
Pramanas are what type of knowledge pramanas are?
And so
That's where the whole thing
psychologically, they
started.
would fall under introspection. You could say they're independent, that they could occur like if you're arguing about like Platonic forms, that ideas could be thought about privately and unobservably in the mind, but they exist also outside of mind. Like, so to say, a computer program could do meta-analysis just like the mind can. However, when a human does it, it's introspection because it's done privately and unobservably in the mind, just like a math formula. You have a computer, you could have a process, you could a form that this is just a simple process. But when a human does it, it's a form of introspection because it occurs privately and unobservably in the mind. And if you do something to make it observable, like writing equations or notes on a paper, that's a form of psychometrics.
All right.
And this is just definitional. And so like paramas are not outside of the bounds of psychiatry. They fit within the definitional, the behaviors, psychometrics, and introspection. Introspection meaning applying to all cognitive processes, psychometric, all external communicative forms of the product of mind, and then behavior, which is actions of the body. I mean, theoretically, you could have a theory of the internal workings of the mind that is tested by the output of the body or psychometric data. Like we mentioned, like an IQ test or like meta-analysis. Here's something to analyze. You analyze it. I don't know what you did with it because it occurred privately and unobservably in your own mind. I could have an understanding of how your mind works. But
Why would
no,
you
your
think that?
mind,
If I don't know how my mind works, why would you think you can get a sense of how my mind works?
because I've seen how your mind operates by input
You've
and output
seen
data.
something, but you can't establish that that's how my mind works. It's a mere apparition in your own mind.
Well, those are a level of psychological theories that are based on output data and could be tested in certain ways that things dependent on the hard problem consciousness is not um, one would say the level of strength of the hypothesis. But if you have competing hypotheses that the output of mind could test, could at least falsify certain hypotheses and possibly you know, prove or provide evidence for other processes. That if this is how your internal processes work, then the external output of your mind will be expected to be in a certain way, or in terms of behavior. That in the measure we can only measure the output, but
Uh-huh.
I mean just like I mean any black box problem, any assessment of internal workings from external observations, but you could still make hypotheses of internal workings from external observations,
It just seems
and
like
you
it
can
wouldn't
still
be
test.
accurate at all. What's the point?
Well, some are significantly accurate.
It's not realistic to expect to get a model of how someone's mind works if they themselves tell you they don't know how it works, is it?
We've even comprehensively to understand processes, to have a holistic, complete theory of mind, let alone processes, and then let alone competencies, like a language test or any level of competency test. That's why I said psychometric. They're most developed and widely used and accepted in competency tests. and saying how the mind became competent or is competent versus saying is the mind competent. We give a competency test, and therefore we know that that mind is competent, let alone processes where you actually have theories of internal processes that are based on like short-term memory,
All right.
working memory, and short-term memory. And then you might also have neural correlates or various things that go together for a psychological cognitive theory that's interdisciplinary. Maybe even short-term memory is probably the seven plus or minus two is one of the wider well-known tested ones. That we don't have an internal working of the mind that would explain how is it that there's this limit of seven, but from psychometric data that this limit of seven is well established.
Sorry about the dead air. I just noticed the memes of destruction was in the chat, and he went to a um anime convention of some sort. Did I get that right? Anyway, it's really hard to follow your reasoning, honestly.
I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. It might not matter. It's okay, like okay, like the Doooovid that studies these things and tries to understand it, and then the Doovood who tries to share. I mean, the Doovood who generally doesn't even try to share these things, and like the Doovood who attempts to share these things with Jennifer unsuccessfully.
What? Yeah, I'm lost because like I don't believe in a unified identity like that. Like, I just don't. I never think about that. I think about like sometimes when I was a kid, I used to think about like what would be fun as an
I even said
adventure.
what I say. I said that you couldn't show the unified identity. I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, it's a James and the multiplicity of selves.
The Janes and the multiplicity of selves. Okay.
I mean, who said anything about a unified identity?
Well, you're talking about yourself as having this like, who am I between person A and person B?
Or multiplicity of selves, so there's still
And I'm just saying there's not even a person A to begin with.
well, there's one
In my
body.
case, there's no
And
person
there's one body. There might multiplicities of selves. But there's only one me speaking to you. And if you want to say there's a unified Doovid that directs my action to study and try to understand these things, and then there's a Doovid who just studies and tries to understand these things, and then there's a Doovid who attempts to share these things, largely unsuccessfully. And if that's a sign that the Doovid who tried to study these things, maybe Doovid didn't understand it, maybe Doovid understood it and just couldn't successfully share it, or maybe Jennifer's just struggling now, just like Doovid had to struggle to understand it, and soon she'll understand this.
understand the importance of the hero narrative or how to implement the narrative voice
Well, any
or
given concept.
any given
No,
concept.
unfortunately, episode 166, and Jennifer has not understood one thing that Doovid has said. It's a sad reality.
Have you understood one thing I've said?
I mean, maybe not. It's tough to
I
know.
think I've gone quite a ways to work out your multiple truth hypothesis and help you develop that.
Well,
It's
because
not it's not that
introspection.
easy to work with it, and I've also,
because
I
introspection,
I
I
think
can't.
there's actual evidence to support the position that you have a viable memory technique.
Yeah, I'm
You already
saying
know
you
this.
I can't know what's in your mind.
Of course not.
I can't observe. I could only observe the output of your mind, and then to say that from the output of your mind, it appears that you understand what I'm saying. So,
Yeah,
do you
that's good.
understand what I said or not? Like, I don't know.
Well, we
I
don't
could
believe it's
never
possible
know.
to understand what you
I
said
could
because
have
to
to measure
understand
it
what
through
you
the
said would
output of.
involve actually merging with you as a person mentally, which wouldn't be something that would happen. So
I was saying generally that's
the
impossible.
closest I would see us as
Minds are
being able to get
independent.
is we could describe the same concept. We could get on the same page with concepts, and then we could have experiences in relation to discovering knowledge about concepts, and then that's like friendship, and that's awesome. I mean, if you want to try to put it to words, that's about as far as I can get, just off the top of my head.
Well, I mean, friendship has nothing to do with understanding ideas
Well, to
and
me, it
saying,
has
okay,
something to do with it because when you can have a friend to enjoy ideas together, that's very special.
yeah, but I mean, you could have a person doesn't have to be your friend for that. And so you have a friend that
Okay.
independent, of whoever they, just talking the theoretical level of if I understand something separate, there's nothing that's gonna. I mean, generally well understood. Jennifer might have some different understanding, but we'll leave that for now. That minds are always independent, and my only way to know if she understands something is through the output of her mind. And so it could be, well, I understand it, and that, so this data I would process and predict a certain result. And so, according to the same data that she predicted the same result as me, that might be a sign or an explanation of the process that when I process certain ideas and then I explain the process that I observe my mind doing, her observation of her own mind and when she explains the process of how her mind works. But most likely it'd be through, say psychometrics, which would be uh, data processing, where there's an independent phenomenon, and we both process the data and produce the same psychometric result. That would be the clearest way
So,
of
like, you verified it.
well,
You
there's a
verified it
verification
yourself,
of
and it passed your own sniff test as such.
well, I'm saying that now basic things of psychology. So if I'm saying my own theory, so it's like multiple truth hypothesis or something that's unique of my mind that doesn't exist in other places versus a well-known process or idea, and to say, okay, well, I'm the one teaching it to Jennifer because I studied it and she didn't. So did I really know it in my own mind? And so you assume, okay, Doovid learned it and understands it at a competent level. And then I explained it to Jennifer, and now she understands it at a competent level. And if that was generalized, that anybody with who understands these canonized general concepts of psychology, that if they spoke to Jennifer independently of Doovid, that she has acquired this knowledge through her communication with Doovid. Let alone something or an independent theory. It might have a flavor because okay, I studied it, and Jennifer didn't study it, and I'm explaining it to her, and so it might have a Doovidian flavor. But generally, it's an independent of Doovid. It's just the vehicle that she learned it from me. But if she learned the process, the psychometric data, if independent of Doovid, if she was talking to someone who never heard of me, who also was familiar with the concept, would be able to verify that Jennifer has mastery or competent knowledge of the concept.
Right. And you're sort of in the already establishing, which is, the whole one of our major themes here. It's a bit of a
Are
problem.
you competency? I mean, authority is generally not a word used in. I mean, psychiatry authority would generally refer to social power, like authority when I have power over
Pretty
you.
much anybody with name recognition is some type of perceived authority.
I was saying generally, I think in the psychological lexicon, authority means something different. So that's why I'm using the word expertise or competency. Authority would be some sort of social construct group where a person had power or authority over, like your parents have legal authority to you make decisions on your behalf, or in an employment or group situation where a person had seniority and therefore had authority, saying, okay, we're streaming right now on your channel, the authority that, you could kick me from the program, you could end the stream. That's a authority. It's a power
That's
connection.
power, not
You're
authority.
you're using the word authority to relation to
I'm saying authority and power
your
are not
expertise or
connected necessarily.
expertise or competency.
I'm just saying authority in the sense that the Pramanas would confer authority, that your own perceptions to yourself, you are maximally authoritative over them, and all your subsequent judgments of authority are relative to your primary own perceptual judgment.
And you're saying authority like
So
author
I'm not thinking authority in the sense of like someone sitting on high dictating. I'm thinking
is the author.
in terms of reliability, it's starting with a perception, and then you can have things that happen inside or happen to that perception, which you could describe as inference. So, like you said, the inference is still happening inside a perception, but the result is different. Because an inference that's going to have something associated with it you might describe as logic. It's like, okay, to there.
I mean,
I don't
just
know if that was
generally
clear.
looking authority, power, right, given to give orders, make decisions, enforce obedience. A person or organization having power or control in a particular typical political or administrative sphere.
Yeah, so I'm using it more in the traditional sense. Like when you do meditation, you have more authority over your experience from all the practice with the self observation. It's that type of authority. And
That
then a
means the
particular
power to give
school,
orders, control. That it's still, that sense
it's like
means you have.
orders to yourself. It's like, I command you to have a great day. Ah, just joking.
Well, it does, and that's saying in psychology, authority is reserved for other things. So we're talking about what I was expressing